Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about board oversight of human capital and culture as fundamental drivers of market value. And joining me is an experienced board member, Susan Skerritt, who's a board member with the Tanger Factory Outlet Centers, Community Bank System, and Vereit Incorporated. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much, TK. It is my pleasure to be here with you.
Well, this is a great topic. And while I'm sure that there's people that are always outliers, I think as a rule, no one really questions the importance of human capital and culture and the people within one's organization as fundamental drivers of market value. I think we can accept that. But the $64,000 question becomes, what is the role that the board plays to ensure that the executive team is managing both those things effectively? So that's my first question for you.
Terrific, TK. So, it's so interesting. Traditionally, the role of human capital management and culture has been the purview of management. But I think increasingly there is an awareness that boards need to play a role here, given the incredibly powerful elements of human capital and culture. And I will tell you, having spent over 35 years as an executive in the commercial banking industry and over 20 years on corporate and not-for-profit boards, I see this, and I think the role that boards should play probably needs to continue to increase. So let me share with you how I think about this. I think about the fact that there are three primary roles of boards, and you and I have discussed this: hiring, promoting the CEO, overseeing the work of the CEO, 1, 2, setting and overseeing the implementation of strategy, and 3, the identification and mitigation of risks. So if we think about human capital management and culture in those three areas, first, hiring, promoting a CEO. A board wants a CEO who has the values that are reflective of the organization and who has exhibited the behaviors that the board believes are appropriate for the organization. So beyond professional expertise and professional experience, a board wants a CEO who brings the right culture, who sets the right tone. And that tone begins at the top, begins with the board, and then continues with the CEO and leadership, but it doesn't end there. So the board also needs to be comfortable that the CEO is going to ensure that the key elements of culture, in fact, flow through the whole organization. The second area, setting and overseeing the implementation of strategy, you can't affect and achieve the right strategy if you don't have the right individuals with the right skills in the right roles to deliver. So as a board is setting a new strategy or overseeing the ongoing implementation of a strategy, what are the capabilities that are missing or the skills that need to be enhanced to actually deliver effectively? Something that management should be able to talk about. And as important, is the business operating model the right one? Is it fit for purpose for the strategy that's undertaken? So board and management can set strategy, but without the right human capital resources, the right culture, the right operating model, it's very difficult to achieve. And then the third area, the area of risk. So the first very clear risk regarding human capital management and culture is employee conduct. Most organizations, most boards have a whistleblower process where issues are raised typically to the audit committee. But I think a question that boards need to ask is, is the culture of the organization encouraging the escalation of those issues? And as importantly, if an issue is raised, is management taking action? I think a number of people have seen situations where bad behavior is allowed to continue when the financial results are strong. And that just does not reflect the values of an organization. The other thing I think a board can be looking at is the independence of the audit and compliance functions and how they're respected by other executives. A second risk that boards need to be concerned about is succession risk. Typically, boards have a very clear understanding of CEO succession and frequently key leadership team. Some boards go below that level, but boards need to be prepared if there are health issues or bad behavior exhibited. Who is available? How ready are they? What development is needed to ensure that they'll be successful? And then last, I would say that in the current environment, there is a complicated set of social justice issues and return to work scenarios. A board needs to ensure that management is able to attract and retain the right resources, the right human resources, as well as keeping people actively engaged and productive. That really is crucial to the long-term health of an organization. So boards need to know that management is balancing the important lessons learned in the past year to position the company effectively going forward. And I think boards can play a role here by providing management perspectives about what's going on in other companies and in other industries. So these are all examples of why human capital management and culture is so important to the board's role.
My first reaction is when you add ESG and stakeholders and all the things that you said there, it's just a yeoman's job today. And one of the things that I'd like to add is that I think that boards need to be sensitive to that actions speak louder than words. You can't sort of describe your goals and attributes of a company if you don't live that. And that's where I think a board has a couple watershed moments every year where it can supports one culture by making sure that the decision that they make mirrors what their organization and leadership is saying. So that I think is a helpful tidbit to remember when we're talking about roles. So now that I think you did a very good job of setting that out. Now, my follow-up question is, how can the board ensure that it has the information necessary to play this oversight role? Particularly related to what people have always thought maybe are like soft topics like culture and human capital, which I know you and I don't believe they're soft, but how do they get the information?
Yeah, exactly. And that clearly is key. So why don't we look at these three areas and take each one. So first, when hiring or promoting a CEO, the board needs to be asking questions about the values of the individual and how the individual has behaved in practice. I think typically the first thing that a board looks at is professional experience, professional expertise. But boards need to be considering both professional experience and expertise and values demonstrated. So in addition to looking at them simultaneously, they need to be part of the formal process. So there needs to be when the process begins, a clear outline of what the values and behaviors are expected of the CEO candidate. Then in terms of strategic planning, the board should require that whenever there is a discussion of new strategic plans or strategic plans underway, that they include a discussion of human capital and culture. Does the organization have the right people with the right skills and the right operating model to execute? So those discussions should always include that information. And if they're not getting it, the board should be asking for it. Now, I want to talk about these risks, and you touch on it, TK. There cannot be a disconnect between the values stated and the values lived. So the board should be asking questions about how is escalation of bad behavior encouraged, and what specific management actions have been taken when bad behavior is uncovered. And to your point, the board plays an incredibly important role in terms of the CEO and the executive leadership team. If bad behavior is uncovered at that level, the board must take action. Then in terms of succession planning, it is normal for a board to regularly see who is lined up to succeed the CEO potentially, or other members of management. But I think in addition to that information about who it is, there also should be development plans discussed with the board, not because the board is necessarily going to opine on those development plans, although they might, but important that the board knows that there is a clear set of development plans. I think it's also important for members of the board to be able to meet those individuals, meet them informally in dinners before board meetings, meet them by visiting offices outside of headquarters, so that boards actually see the key successors or potential successors in operation. The board needs to be sure that there is a robust performance evaluation process. Does the company have 360-degree evaluations? Are they evaluating not just how the manager of an individual believes someone is operating, but also their peers and their employees? And is direct feedback provided? So one way of evaluating, a board evaluating that development can occur, is if the CEO and the executive leadership can talk about how direct feedback is encouraged through that process. There should be employee engagement surveys. And first, they should exist, and then boards should probably see at a high level the results of those surveys to identify potential hotspots, to issues that could derail the company. And those surveys typically provide peer comparisons, so it is possible for the board to evaluate how well the company is doing in effectively engaging its employees. Are there unusual attrition rates? Is that another signal of problems? Are exit interviews held? Is the information cataloged? How is the information actually utilized by management? And finally, if it's appropriate, what are the health and safety measures that the company has employed? Essentially, the board should consider the human assets of a company to be as important as the financial assets, and ask all of these questions and require all of this information so that they can be assured that human capital management and culture is being effectively managed by the executive leadership.
Susan, very well stated. We have about 60 seconds left, and I wanted to ask you if there's any other, with all your experience, is there any other words of wisdom on what boards might consider to stay on top of this issue before we have to wrap things up?
Absolutely, TK. You know, it's interesting. We haven't touched on the fact that institutional investors and other stakeholders are typically looking for public disclosure of human capital management metrics and looking for boards to evaluate the CEO on those bases. So boards need to really clarify the roles and responsibilities that they play on their committees at the board level. And there should be an evaluation of the specific metrics that are most appropriate for the organization to be successful in the long run.
Well, listen, this is a topic that I know you feel strongly about, and we've talked about how strongly I feel about that culture can eat strategy for lunch. I'm not sure that that's always true, but I certainly feel that a strong culture can be very powerful. So I wanted to thank you, Susan, for taking the time to pass this wisdom along and joining us. And hopefully someday down the road, we'll have you back again and tap this experience again. So thanks for joining us.
Terrific. Thank you, TK.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.